The cacophony outside John Baker's apartment barely registered as he pored over the ledger books late into the night. Distant police sirens and shouts carried through the thin walls of the derelict building, muffled yet insistent sounds from the troubled streets plaguing this rundown part of town. These late-night disturbances had become as familiar to John as the musty old odor permeating the aging floorboards beneath his feet. Tonight, the echoes served only to deepen the fine lines etched into John's weathered brow as he scoured the financial pages for some solution to his ever-tightening money problems. As landlord of this decaying four-story walk-up, repairs were a constant battle against the elements of time and poverty eating away at its structure. With more vacant units and fewer tenants able to pay their monthly rent, John struggled harder each month to cover taxes, utilities, and maintenance for the aging heap of brick and mortar weighing him down. Another long draught of lukewarm coffee did little to ease the tension knotting in John's shoulders. Rubbing gritty eyes, he glanced again at the final column of figures, unwilling to accept the bleak reality staring back at him once more. How much longer could he keep this place from crumbling down around its residents' ears? Just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, a strange scratching sound broke the bubble of concentration. John froze, listening intently as the light scraping noise came again from somewhere down the hall. At this late hour, all tenants should be securely behind their own doors, based on the creaking wood informing John of their nightly routines. Yet something stirred in the darkness beyond his pool of lamplight, scuttling softly in a way that raised the fine hairs along his arms. Rising soundlessly, John retrieved the heavy cast-iron poker leaning beside the fireplace. Its solid heft brought him marginal comfort as he eased open his door to peer out. Down the shadowed corridor, only the occasional flicker of a television filtered through crack under several doors. The building held its breath, waiting. Gripping the poker tight, John crept stealthily towards the source of the strange sound, emanating from one of the long, vacant units halfway down. Its door hung loosely on rusted hinges, long stripped of any number plate. With barely audible clicks of his borrowed weapon, John approached the threshold and peered around the jamb into the Stygian void within. At first, he saw nothing but deep shadows cloaking the barren space. Then, a subtle gleam caught his eye towards the back corner, reflecting dimly enough to discern a shape amidst the black. Advancing cautiously, the vague form resolved into a few folded blankets and scattered tin food containers, as if someone had hastily abandoned a makeshift camp. But all the units were empty, long devoid of squatters or transients seeking shelter. A rattle of pipes echoed distantly, only exacerbating John's rising unease. Without warning, a dark shape flew past on silent feet just beyond the fringe of light spilling from the hall. John jumped with a strangled gasp, his heart threatening to burst from his chest as shock and adrenaline coursed through him. Whirling in place, he stared wildly into the enveloping murk for any sign of the intrusive presence. Nothing but the draft from a loose board answered him from the vacant unit. Yet the telltale clues of an indigent camp spoke for themselves. Someone or something had taken up secret residence within John's empty building, unseen by any eye. Sleep evaded John for what remained of the night, though exhaustion pulled at his raw nerves as dawn's pale light seeped into his dreary apartment. Each small noise sparked flurries of imaginings, far worse than the last, as the implications of the prior night's disturbing discovery kept him rigid with unease. By the time shuffling footsteps stirred in the hall, announcing the stirrings of early risers, John emerged haggard and drawn. His first stop was the vacant unit, finding the camp exactly as he had left it, in his haste to flee its enclosing dark. Under the scrutiny of his flickering bulb, the scattered refuse revealed no further clues to its mysterious inhabitant. Frustrated, John began tossing the place in a desperate bid for answers, tearing through every decrepit nook and cranny with increasing reckless abandon. The pounding grew so fervent that he failed to notice the creak of hinges or the set of tentative footsteps, halting in the doorway until a timid male voice asked, "Is everything all right in here, Mr. Baker?" John whirled with a start, finding narrow-shouldered Arthur Freeman staring at the disheveled scene with concern creasing his scholarly features. "Arthur," John replied gruffly, struggling to steady racing breaths. "This unit. Someone's been squatting here without my knowledge. Just wanted a better look for clues as to who." Arthur frowned, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses as keen eyes surveyed the mess. "How strange. You're sure the building has been fully vacant?" At John's nod, Arthur ventured closer, scanning curiously. "Well, I've not seen anyone entering or leaving, but these old walls don't allow much privacy. Perhaps another set of eyes could help. I'm always around should you need an extra pair to investigate further." Something in Arthur's kind offer and obvious intelligence sparked an idea in John's frazzled mind. You may be onto something. This place could use a tenant association. Eyes and ears in every room. You understand. Gather the usual suspects in the lounge after supper. Think we could use a community meeting?" As Arthur nodded thoughtfully and took his leave, John turned back to the stock room with a glimmer of restored resolve. Unnerved as he was, facing this threat alone seemed the least wise path. With cooperation among the remaining tenants as his new strategy, hopefully the elusive squatter's identity would be flushed into the light where it belonged, and out of the building before further tensions could escalate under its unseen manipulation. That evening, the run-down common lounge slowly filled with most of the remaining tenants answering John's call. Hushed murmurs and darting looks between longtime residents betrayed an underlying unease already simmering below the surface. Once all gathered, John launched into recounting his discovery of the secret camp and rationale for organizing their communal defense. Skepticism greeted his tale, though acceptance of a tenant watch spread as mutual fears reinforced each other in the close quarters. From then on, an unspoken atmosphere of watchfulness imbued the dilapidated halls. Behind closely drawn curtains, peering eyes tracked all movements. Day and night, strangers drew immediate suspicion, yet the perpetrator remained frustratingly unseen, even under constant communal observation. Each night, as darkness swathed the building, paranoia simmered anew with the rattle of loose panes and groan of protesting foundations, becoming chilling soundtracks to lonely vigils against an unseen menace burrowing deeper into their midst. A week passed without further incident, yet the building's wired tension only continued to rise under their diligent watch. Even so, the elusive intruder evaded all attempts to flush it from its lurking place. By night, the tenants prowled routes, agreed in their scheduled patrols, peering into every shadow with growing suspicion. One such evening found lone widow Mrs. Wilson pacing down the third-floor hall with her trusty pair of scissors held before her like claws. At every turn, she whipped around at the faintest creak, hacking and slicing fruitlessly at empty air between heavy breaths. A patchwork of lantern light and deep gloom played tricks even on her paranoid mind. Just as Mrs. Wilson neared the end of her route, a blood-curdling scream split the stillness. She dropped her weapons and bolted down the stairs towards the source on the second floor, flinging open the door to find the Jenkins cowering in their lounge. "Get out. Something's in here. It touched me," wailed young Sarah, her face a mask of horror, barely seen in the dim, wavering glow. Rushing inside, Mrs. Wilson scanned every angle with Mrs. Jenkins by her trembling side. Fumbling fingers sought the light switch to illuminate the bedroom, revealing nothing amiss beyond disheveled sheets. How can this be? They searched the tiny flat thoroughly. To no avail. The presence mysteriously vanished once more. Word spread like wildfire through the fearful residence. By dawn, a haggard crowd gathered outside the Jenkins door, demanding the full story from their rattled witnesses. Later that afternoon, John called an emergency meeting in the sweltering common room. The oppressive heat did little to quell the roiling unease as shattered tenants crowded together for protection in numbers. Once the din settled, John recounted the night's disturbing event and appealed for calm. However, paranoia had taken root too deeply to be reasoned with. Accusations flew between longtime neighbors, now seeing danger even in familiar faces. Tensions fractured further amid shouts of denial and doubt, fragmenting the tenuous bonds between those crumbling walls had long held together. In the pandemonium, few noticed Arthur Freeman silently sliding from the room until a deafening crash shattered the chaos. All turned to find the door hanging mangled from a single hinge, the source of impact mysteriously absent from view. Splintered wood was the sole evidence of violence, while terrified glances conveyed the swiftly spreading rot of hysteria, infecting them all from within, under phantom assault from without. In the aftermath, with fractures spreading too far to repair, the tenants scattered to the shelters of their own isolated units, barricading themselves within nervously in anticipation of dark's insidious grip. Yet even behind fortified walls, no refuge could be found from one's own fearful imaginings, running wild, or the rising certainty that something malefic had infested their rotting foundation and was toying with them, all from the thriving pit of paranoia, burrowing deeper with each passing night. Night descended upon the shattering tenement, each barricaded tenant trembling alone with private torments behind dozens of locks and braced doors. In the blackest hours before dawn, a fitful slumber offered John no escape from ominous imaginings crawling the walls of his restless chamber. A crash ripped John abruptly from his restless doze, lurching violently upright amidst a sudden blaze of light. Shielding watering eyes, he stumbled towards the source in confusion to find the kitchen sink sprinkling water across shattered porcelain and glass. Yet no culprit emerged amidst the glittering carnage strewn across peeling linoleum. Heart pounding, John swung his gaze wildly across every angle, finding only himself reflected endlessly in fractured fragments, littering the eerie scene. No breeze stirred, no pipes groaned. Only silence answered his surging adrenaline. Shaking off dust from splintered cabinets, John withdrew, unnerved, certain some invisible force had struck in his very domain, unseen. All that followed passed in a frenzied blur. Pounding on neighbors' doors roused no response beyond muffled whimpers. Shouts drew only deeper silence. Just as dark madness threatened to engulf John's fraying judgment, feeble light bled from the crack under last occupant Arthur Freeman's room. John hammered urgently until the door shuddered open, a sliver, revealing a gaunt face pasted in sweat. "Mr. Baker, something's coming," pleaded Arthur in a strained rasp, eyes huge and haunted behind fogged lenses in the gloom. It moves all around, watching from every room. We're not alone in here. A crashing thunder shook the hallway before John could reply, as if the very walls were caving in on them. Two tortured screams rent the air in tandem, rising to a shrill crescendo before cutting off abruptly. Encroaching darkness swallowed all trace of Arthur's doorway, leaving John alone to stare aghast into unfathomable void. Staggering back, sanity fraying at the edges, John snatched the first makeshift weapon within reach, an oxidized fire extinguisher, and spun to face the predatorial night, closing in from every angle. His mind raced frantically to make sense of the impossible. Sensory overload threatening to consume rational thought under sheer magnitude of terror, mounting on unseen wings. A creak from the floor above pierced John's feverish daze, dragging his wild gaze skyward as primal instinct took over. His limbs propelled him up rickety stairs. Extinguisher raised like a cudgel as fleeting lantern light revealed the landing in disarray. Shattered drywall dust billowed through splintered holes, perforating the hall where Arthur's doorway once stood. Panicked whimpers floated from within the demolished apartment, spurring John forward at a breakneck run. Inside, he froze in mute horror at the chaos-consumed room. Shattered windows spilled grimy light across walls, scrawled with arcane symbols, reducing most surfaces to crumbling wreckage. In the center knelt Arthur, spattered scarlet, shielding a bound Mrs. Wilson, trembling hysterically in his arms. As one, their widened eyes shot up to lock onto John's petrified stare with a single, silent plea. Hours passed in a blur as John tended to the trauma of his surviving neighbors. Arthur bore minor lacerations and quickly regained composure, assisting John's efforts to help stabilize the trauma. Stricken Mrs. Wilson, despite her own injuries. By dawn, some uneasy semblance of calm returned to the wounded tenement, yet an undercurrent of hysteria still simmered beneath the facade of order. Once assured of the tenant's immediate physical care, John called another emergency meeting in the sweltering common room amid palpable hostility and fear. Facing the haggard assemblage, he recounted the inexplicable events that darkened their hellish night, trying in vain to make rational sense of clear signs of struggle, yet lack of culprit. However, little rationale remained in the fearful mob, dissected by paranoia and loss. Accusations flew wildly among traumatized faces, stained with tears, spittle, and flecks of drying blood. Somehow, John and Arthur avoided accusation, despite their timely discovery. Yet no answers emerged through the chaos, only further fracturing of their crumbling bastion. Finally, John bellowed for silence, piercing the pandemonium with his thunderous baritone. Enough. This senseless violence will get us all killed if we turn on each other. We must stand united and root out the true source of this evil in our midst before it's too late. His impassioned plea sparked a fragile kernel of reason within the desperate crowd. Murmurs of assent met John's stalwart gaze sweeping the assembly, finding willing allies in steadfast souls like Arthur Freeman, ready to assist his inquisition, though resolution remained fragile under the crushing weight of uncertainty and losses. Dark shadows had already stolen. That evening, John led the newly devoted sleuths on covert sweeps through every crevice of the cursed tenement beneath flickering bulbs and flashlights, scouring for any signs the tormentor had left behind. But the entity adapted cunningly, leaving not a trace of its presence discernible amidst the wreckage strewn in its wake. Just when doubt threatened to reignite tension, Arthur's keen eyes noticed telltale scratch marks, marring a skirting board within John's dilapidated apartment. Tracing the grooves led them behind a tilted mirror, revealing a narrow opening forcibly expanded amidst the cramped cavity. With bated breath, John squeezed through the tight space, only to find himself staring into cold, bottomless void. Before him gaped a hidden shaft, plunging into inky abyss, flecked with remnants of shattered brick and drywall strewn far below. John leaned cautiously over the precarious edge, dislodging loose crumbles into the endless sinkhole, bored deeply into their foundations and beyond all understanding. For the first time, a sliver of context emerged regarding their tormentor's impossible movements, and its true nature seemed far worse than any theory dared imagine. The shaft's ominous discovery shattered all remaining hopes that rational explanations could be found for the unholy disturbances racking John's crumbling tenement. Something unnatural had hollowed out the marrow of their world, manipulating their fragile reality from the unseen spaces between. That night, as the last wary tenants took up watches in their barricaded cells, John summoned Arthur to the barren floor beneath the sinkhole's opening. By lamplight, the pair picked through rubble and blueprints, scavenged, desperate for clues to the monstrosity lurking in the foundation's lightless bowels. Hours passed fruitlessly until a glint caught their eyes. An odd metallic sheen emanated from within a mound of pulverized concrete. Together they pried away chunks to exhume a rusted hatch amid cracking plaster, long calcified shut by the passage of time. With pried bars as make-shift tools, the pair tore and chipped away incrustations, disguising generations of secrets. At last, with a shriek of rusty hinges, the hatch popped open to reveal a narrow descending staircase. John lifted the lone lantern, casting its swaying glow into the abyss below as cold, fetid air rushed up to caress sweat, slicked brows, as one, yet shuddering. John led the descent with Arthur close behind into the netherworld, burrowed in the heart of their domain. Deeper and deeper, the winding stairs plunged, the feeble light, unable to pierce the Stygian depths, pressing ever nearer. Finally, the stairs ended at an earthen tunnel, stretching endlessly into the murk. John started forward, only to freeze in place as an unnatural scratching echoed softly in the muffled quiet. The noise neared, joined by a nightmarish skittering that set teeth on edge. Around the corner slithered an abhorrent shape, blind white orbs surveying the intruders with cold calculation. Before sanity could react, the monstrosity lunged with impossible speed, guttural snarl rending the confined space. John jabbed his lantern instinctively, the fierce flames catching its matted fur instantly. As the creature writhed, shrieking, revealed by fluttering firelight, its true hellish nature was seared forever into traumatized eyes. A gaunt, bipedal beast, dragging vestigial limbs, spine jutting unnaturally from hunched roach, like carapace. Arthur vomited in horror as the entity continued convulsing, its unholy lineage awakening ancestral terrors. Long thought, sealed away in its death throes. The creature's eyes met John's dead-on, and in that fleeting moment, a true comprehension of the abyssal evil residing undetected beneath their feet was seared irrevocably into his shattered psyche. Days passed in a blur. The tenement and its dark secrets were systematically razed, the shaft utterly collapsed and filled, all traces expunged, as if the ordeal had been naught but a shared delusion blurring the lines of reality. Yet in quiet moments, John was certain he could hear faint scratchings echoing up from deep beneath their feet, a promise that some evils lay dormant, not dead, in the black gulfs between worlds, hidden in the decaying foundations of a city choking on its own shadows.